Hey everyone, welcome to Watch Complications. I'm Brian. We are going to be discussing the Feynman Fjord. I have the Magma model. I think it's going to be one of the more desirable models in this new series release on pre-order from Feynman Timekeepers, Singapore-based micro brand. Been lucky enough to be the first one to receive this prototype, and we're going to get into all the nitty-gritty detail, pros and cons. Keep in mind that Watch Complications is not just another watch channel. This is all things watches. We do how complications work. We do modding, we do tinkering, we do making, we do fabricating, we do reviews in all kinds of ways with watches, accessories, tools. So if you want a full-on watch channel, this is the place for you. I also go in detail on my videos and review. I don't cut corners. If you want the full deal, this is where you need to be. So I love interacting with micro brand owners. There's a couple from Singapore I really like, Feynman being one of them, Vario being another, and I've got a future review coming up for a new startup trying to get out of the gate. Now, I've reviewed some Feynman watches before. I've reviewed the Feynman 1, which was their first model. I had the blue one first, and I liked it, but I wanted the Panda model, so I got one of the last Pandas, and I still have that in my collection. I haven't sold it off. I think it's unique. I think it's different, and I really like that watch. Then they had the Cove, which was a success, and I reviewed one of those as well, compared it to the Feynman 1, so like, well, which one of these would I choose if I was going to choose one from Feynman Timekeepers, and I went with the 1 as opposed to the Cove. Most of that was due to the fact that it has 2 crowns. Now, this watch, the Fjord, has the same case and the same general design, same hands, and it has the dual crown. And so whenever I talked to Young Lim about this watch, I was like, if you can convince me of getting a watch that has 2 crowns, then that's quite an achievement. It's going to happen. Could I be convinced to like a dual crown watch? Well, let's see. One thing I know, this thing is crazy comfortable. Love the strap, love the collars in play, and here's what we look on the back. We'll give, of course, all the up-close stuff, all the macro stuff. Keep in mind as we go through this, this is a prototype, and I'll give you the changes that will be taking place between the prototype and the production model. So Feynman Timekeepers, I have reviewed their watches before. They're a young micro brand from Singapore, so they've been around for just a few years, and they started out on Kickstarter, and that was with their Feynman 1, which I've reviewed, and I've done a comparison of this with the blue, as I mentioned. The only thing I feel like is a big con on this one is just the size of the crown. I like that it's at 4. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail here in a minute, but nice movement. It's got a top grade ETA. It's a nice dress look, particularly on this Huddersfield Worsted strap. So that collection sold out. They've pretty much sold out all the collections that they've done. Then they had the Cove, which this model is based off of the same case, hands, and some design characteristics. They've also done a more artistic collection called the Coalesce collection, which is 3D, hand painted, a lot of handwork into the dials and the straps, and that's a very small collection of like 18 watches. And then now we've got the Fjord collection, which they're not doing on Kickstarter. This is a solo pre-order, so I will link to their website below, but this thing launches on the 28th of September. If you like the look of it, get one sooner rather than later. The pre-order price is pretty good. When you see a Feynman watch, you know it's a Feynman. There are consistent design characteristics that are quite unique, and it just tells you that that's part of this brand's design language, and much of that is tied to natural elements. Like, for example, in the Feynman 1, you had the honeycomb pattern, and they used very distinct ratios for the sizes of the circles, for example. There's the seconds hand, which is supposed to be reminiscent of a lizard's tail. Of course, you can interpret that some other ways, which I've heard and seen discussed on different watch forums and whatnot, but they've got their distinct design language, and you know what? That's good. You're not going to confuse a Feynman watch with something else. There's so many homage things out there, so many derivative watches being made, particularly just dive this, dive that. And it's nice to see a brand that just does their own thing. It's unique, stands out. I am a watch enthusiast through and through, and those who watch the channel know my work. I don't wear watches for any other purpose than I like watches and I like them for myself. I'm not out to get comments on watches or care what people think about the watches I wear, the brands that I choose to purchase, that kind of stuff. One thing I will say about this watch this week is that typically I go months without anybody commenting on a watch I might be wearing.
I had comments every day, seemed like from somebody, or anytime I was in a conversation, people's eyes would drift toward the watch. This is a watch that actually picked up attention, and they're like, "What is this?" It's so, because it's so different, it's so unique. So I will say, I did get asked quite a few times in wearing this watch this week, like, "What is that?" One of the comments I got from a colleague was, "That must be a watch that the hip kids are wearing." So it's a good look, it's unique, and that uniqueness is what has made Feynman successful, I think, in the microbrand space, which has got lots of options out there right now. Now, specifically with the Fjord's design language, we're talking again about fjord landscapes. We've got the cardinal numbers on the internal bezel. So we're talking navigation watch. It's got a field look about it, even though it's got the same case as the Cove, which again was a dive watch. They've repurposed it here, and the dial does make the entire watch feel different, including the case, and I'll say more about that. Let's run off some specs for this thing. Our diameter is about 41.5 to 42 millimeter, depending on where you're measuring it. Case height from the case back to top of crystal is spot on at 13 millimeter. So those two dimensions give it a good, nice, sweet spot for most wrists. And then you throw in the lug to lug, which is about 45.5 millimeter. It wraps around the wrist pretty well. My wrist is about 19 centimeters, 7.5 inches. Of course, it's got sort of this Omega style wrapping to the lugs. It has various faces and it's highly polished. So it has a nice, good look that wraps around. And this case looks bigger with the Cove dial, and it didn't feel as well either. I think there's a couple reasons for that. I'll get to those with the pros and cons. It has a little bit to do with the dial and how this just looks all together as an entire package, but also the strap, I think, is making a big difference here. Our lug width is 20 millimeter and our weight is about 91 grams. This strap, which is thin but really well made, high quality leather, it's Zulu style strap, but because it's on this type of a leather, it's got a light feel about it, which is exactly what you want with a navigation / field style watch that you expect to be wearing out and about. The case is 316L stainless steel sapphire, has AR coating. I didn't see it on the specs, but you can see right there, when you get that blue tint, you know you've got some good AR coating in there. We have a solid case back, which I'll show you more detail on as we go along. But so solid case back again has a nice design. I'm okay with like sort of watches you'd be expected to be wearing out and about in nature a little bit more. I like the fact that it's a solid case back, not an exhibition case back. Even though it's got a nice movement in it, I think it just fits better with the overall theme. Both of the crowns are screw down. The one at 4 is our winding and time setting, and the crown at 2 is rotating our internal bezel, which is the navigation with the cardinal numbers on it. You might have seen on the back we have 200 meters of water resistance, so 20 ATM, a little over 600 feet. The movement in this is an ETA 2895-2. It's a common movement that's a modular design, so you can get lots of different complication combinations and whatnot. It's used in a lot of sort of mid-tier brands, like so Hamilton's used it a lot, for example, when they're Jazz Masters. You get Tissot, Bella Ross, Tag, who actually name their own calibers that are based on the 2890 family. It's an automatic movement. This has the elbow grade, so it's not top like what was used in the Cove or the One in terms of the ETA movements being used, being top grade. So there's elbow, and then there's top, and then there's chronometer. It's a good movement. It's going to keep time well. You don't need all the bells and whistles every time. The advantage from the business perspective is it allows them to offer the watch at a lower rate, particularly the pre-order, because they're using the elbow grade instead of the top grade. So don't be put off by the specific variant of the movement. It's a good one. They've got the small seconds complication, which is one of the modules you can get on that family. It's got hacking. Now, the 2895 has a date. Of course, this doesn't have a date on the dial, which means we have a ghost position on this. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. That's just one of the things to consider. Beat rate 28.8, power reserve about 50 hours. It's 27 joule movement. 1-year warranty is the standard on the Feynman Timekeeper's watches. I mentioned the price is $799 pre-order. That's in US dollars. When this goes up to regular pricing after the pre-order period, it's going to be about $1,100. So now would be the time to get it. I mean, you're saving $300. The dial on the production models is going to be a sandwich dial, which just means it's multi-layered. You got the loom in back and you've got the design dial surface on top. So the prototype model you see here actually has stamped loom, and so it's got depth to it, but the process used for this prototype, it was a stamping method, not a true sandwich dial. So keep that in mind if you pick that up, that subtlety on this review, that the production dial is a sandwich dial, the loom will be good. Chrono AMR is the loom that they're using in this by Chrono Design. They're using custom pigments across this line, and they're different, right? So you don't see this kind of orange loom very often. There are going to be 4 models of this watch. There's the Founders Edition. All of Feynman's watches, they do a limited run that they call a Founders Edition, which has a same combination of a teal greenish color with rose gold, and I think they're going to make 50 of those for this. There's going to be the Tempest, which is the gray, slate gray with a white looking aqua blue loom that's white during the day but it glows blue at night, the Tempest. This is the Magma. This is the one that I think I liked the best as I saw the different models. Of course, we got a black dial with this bright orange loom that is to give this notion of magma, lava, right, breaking through the Earth's surface. And then there's the Core, which is going to be a very limited run of 35 pieces. And the key with that one is that it's going to have modern standard Arabic. So a little bit of a different feel. I'll go into more detail on the loom and the crowns and all the pros and cons and stuff in a second. But it's going to come with 2 straps. One is an FKM strap, which they've used before. It came with the Cove model. That's sort of a rubber strap. And it's going to come with one Yi leather strap. Yi's a company that they've been using for a while that custom makes these leather straps for most of their watches. You can see Feynman stamped here on the back. This is a Zulu style strap. This is one of the best things about the watch, actually. It makes it super comfortable wear. I like Zulu style straps. They're way better than NATO. And this is nice and thin, but you can tell it's high quality leather. It's not going to crack. It's not going to tear. It's not going to snap. It's good construction. And so I really do appreciate the strap on this watch. It really makes the watch overall in terms of the look and feel. Okay, so pros and cons of this watch. Well, I mentioned in the intro, I am not a dual crown person. In fact, most of them drive me nuts. It's just not my thing. But I told them if they can convince me to like a dual crown watch, then they have achieved the near impossible. And so let me put this on the wrist for you real quick. So now you get a better sense of how this looks overall. As I mentioned, I always felt like the Cove looked a little bit bigger on the wrist. I think a lot of it had to do with the strap and the comfort of the strap. The case, it turns out, is actually fine. I felt like the case was just too large or something like that. Maybe it was I don't know what it was. I think it's a visual more than anything. So when you have what you feel is a big case or a very complex dial design plus the double crowns, it gets a little bit too overwhelming, you might say. At least that's my perspective. But in this situation, the dials tone down a little bit. Now, it might sound weird, but the Cove is a pretty busy dial. It's got the layering that was part of the Feynman 1, but they sort of upped the complexity and the design, just the visual effect of it in terms of like the wave pattern and things like that. Now, a lot of people like it. Hey, that's sold out, and kudos to them. I do like the Shadow model, by the way. I've seen pictures of that as a special edition they decided to run. That's a good looking watch if you like the whole blacked out thing, which is seemingly popular right now. But the dual crowns fade away a little bit more. They're not as obvious on this particular model. I think that's because the dial has a great little simplicity to it. Even though it's got this crazy cool looking loom, it just doesn't feel over designed, you might say. So my own personal verdict is I actually like this dual crown watch, which is saying something. So kudos to Feynman Timekeepers for getting me there with this watch. Now, given the dial and the strap, if you change the strap from rubber to leather and you change the bezel from a timing bezel to a navigation bezel, you get a different use out of the case, which was a dive case initially, but now you've got a little bit more what feels like a sport look, which is, again, that case and the cuts in it and the twists in it give you a little bit more of that Omega feel. This case and dial design are a lot more complementary of each other, I think, than this case and the Cove dial design. It just feels better. It looks better. I think the strap, the texture that's on these handmade leather straps, again, provides part of that overall look and feel, the fact that it's the Zulu style strap. This is just all much more complementary and comes off to me as a much more cohesive and eye-catching and useful and just nice design. So let's start summarizing our pros a little bit, which is where I like to start before I get into some of the cons. We've got a strap that I really like. Okay, I've made that clear. I like the dial design for the most part. There's one thing I would change about it. I'm okay with a navigation bezel. I don't know that it's the most useful of things. I mean, people typically aren't going to be using the watch to help navigate direction, for example. So yes, it's part of the design. That's the type of watch they wanted to make, is this navigation style watch. But I also kind of wonder, was it really needed? Let's take this second crown out of the mix. Let's take the inner bezel out, shrink things up, or put a different type of a chapter ring in here, maybe a textured chapter ring. That would look pretty cool. And then you've got something I think is a little bit more my style. This is still okay in terms of, hey, it's got something different that you don't see maybe as often. So the dimensions on this thing are great, the weight is great, and of course the materials being used are great in terms of the case, crystal, overall weight, size, dimensions. All that is a big pro for me on this particular watch. If you watch much of the channel, you know I like the small seconds complication. It's typically at 6 with the crown at 3. They've just rotated this an hour, and that's why you get this offset effect, which I like with adventure watches, travel watches, and such more and more. It's nice having the crown at 4. It just keeps a little bit more out of the way. Again, I like the crown at 3, just like most people do. That's well, you don't usually have much of a choice, but a crown at 4 is good for me as well. Probably the biggest pro that this thing for me has going for it is just the overall design, the feel. I like the dial. It's got a complexity to it, but a simplicity about it. This color of lume, which is a custom pigment, you just don't see this very often. There are other watches out there that have types of red lume and orange lume, but not quite like this. This is just different. And that uniqueness is a pro. It's not crazy. It's not over the top. You could easily take something like this and make it feel gimmicky, but that's not the case here. Now, the other models have different colors of lume that also are unique and look equally as good, like the aqua blue, and you've got this bright orange here. You have a teal lume with the green glow in the Founders Edition. So there's just something there for everybody in terms of what you might like. Those are pros going for this. And at $7.99, when you consider the pre-order price, you're getting a couple straps, nice custom handmade straps, the case materials, dimensions, this unique look, the type of movement in this. It's a good package for $800. If you don't get it now with the pre-order and you get to where you're talking $1,100, then I start to get a little bit more conscientious about that particular type of an expenditure, because that's a lot of different possibilities in that price range, particularly in the micro brand world, but even just some other types of watches that might be good to give a go. So if you're going to get it on the pre-order price and get it now. Zulu straps are just so comfortable. I really got turned on to those by having quite a few with Vario products that I've tested and used and worn with their watches and other watches. It's a strap style that I've come to really appreciate and like, and never thought I would. I mean, it's a lot of keepers, and they're all made of metal, and they bang them on things, and they're actually pretty reasonable type of strap. So recommended, much better than a NATO, and sometimes beats rubber. Okay, but you all know I'm always gonna give you the things I see as potential cons as well. Not everything's rosy with every single watch. I've already mentioned I'm not a dual crown person. I do like it here. I think it fits well with the design. But if I was given a choice, maybe I would take that out of play. The crowns on this model, as on the Cove, they do feel a little small given the case size. Now, I don't like big crowns, and you don't want things that are kind of sticking out in the way or that are an inconvenience. But these are small. I can appreciate that. If you're going to wear this thing a lot, not be setting the time a lot. So the crowns are screw down. That's one thing, which is nice, gives you that little extra protection. unwind, should pop out into the winding position. Sometimes you gotta give it a little bit of a nudge. But one thing I noticed on the Cove model, and I feel it here too, because of the crown design, and it's recessed into the case. If I want to go to time setting, then usually what I would do on a watch is put my index finger under and my thumb on top and kind of pull out. That doesn't just naturally work. When you go in that position, try to do that on this watch, it's not going to work. It's actually easier to go from the side, but the easiest way to get this out to one of the other positions is to do it from the top. It's just, I don't know what it is. I think it's because of the case design here on the bottom. For some reason, just getting your index finger under this part of the case back, it just doesn't have room. I guess unless you have really long fingernails, but I keep mine cut pretty short. And I mean, you have to look at my fingers all the time on video, right? But the easiest way to do it on this one is go from the top. It's cinched that way. So that's just one of these like weird little things, at least for me. But this has a ghost position. That's the main thing here. So initially we're in winding position. Here I've pulled out to what you might think of as first position, and it just spins. So that's what would normally be a date. You can kind of hear it clinking in there. I didn't take this apart, so I don't know if they actually have a date wheel on there on the inside or not, but that's the quick set for the date. Depending on the company, they might take the date wheel out and the gearing out so that it doesn't feel that weird, at least that it's actually there underneath the hood. But I'm not going to take this one apart. I like taking watches apart, but I'm not going to do that to the prototype. So you do have ghost position, and then you can pull out to the time setting position, and then you're good to go. This ghost position stuff is not an anomaly in the small watch market, micro brand world. It's, in my opinion, it's much better than putting a date on here. So I'm not a huge fan of the date unless it's done in the right way, which means either at 6 o'clock or at 12 o'clock or in a way that gives symmetry to the dial. But it's better than that. But it's still something that people might think of as a con is the fact that it does have a ghost position. The hands, they're the same hands that were used on the Cove. I'm thinking a redesign here might have been a good thing to do. They work. They do go with the overall feel of the case. So it's not the end of the world or anything like that, even though we are standing on some lava here. It's an opportunity that I think they could have taken to do something different with the hands. I think it would have given it a little bit more distinction away from the Cove. Even though it shares the same case and has that same dual crown, let's make it feel a little bit more different beyond just the dial by doing a different hand design that maybe blends a little bit better with the dial. Thinking of that as well with the seconds hand, on this prototype at least, it's white. Is there something else that might have worked a little bit better? I do kind of wonder what would that look like in steel, or what would it look like if it was loomed orange? What would it look like if it was a contrasting color? Maybe if it was tipped or something. So trying some of those different combinations, I'm sure they've looked at several different options, but I will say that the white hand for the seconds does connect to the white printing on the bezel. Now there are two things on this model that are going to be different on the production model. I already mentioned the loom here is actually stamped. It still has a layering to it, but it's not a true sandwich dial. And so that's one thing that's going to be different. You might pick up on that subtlety, maybe not. You can still see that layering to it, but this isn't a full-on sandwich dial. In the one that you get, if you order one of these things, it certainly will be. The other prototype to production issue that they will be fixing and dealing with is the rotation of the internal bezel. It's pretty wacky on the prototype. I'm a persistent person, and I probably took 15 or 20 minutes to try to get this thing set where the north was exactly at 12. It's still not perfect. It drives me nuts. So I'm going to unscrew the crown here at 2, and you can see once it's popped out into position that we're going to turn counterclockwise, rotate, clockwise, rotate. But when you go to screw this thing back in, you get movement in the bezel, and when you unscrew, you get movement in the bezel, and it's almost like different every time. It jumps a little bit. So that's something that I'm told will be fixed, and I believe them on that particular front. That's just something that I thought I'd point out, that it drove me a little nuts with the prototype, but hey, it's a prototype. What do you expect? Yes, I just spent like another 5 minutes trying to get that correct, but I'm leaving it alone for now, for the rest of the video. So that's not an actual con. That's going to be fixed. So loom, sandwich dial, and the crown, bezel rotation, not something to worry about. This gives you an idea of what's coming with production. The actual two little things I might be more concerned about in terms of cons. I noticed this because I've been wearing it all week. I was sitting on the couch. It's getting evening, later in the evening. They went with the Roman numerals, an X and the two ones at 12. And even I mentioned this actually to the owner, and I was like, have you looked at this at an angle in the dark or close to dark? These are very small, the ones. And it looks okay here, straight onto the face. But whenever you are sitting in particular angles in low light, you can almost not read it. You can't see it anymore. And this isn't an issue, again, in bright light, straight on. But when it's on your wrist and at an angle and that light gets low, they almost disappear. Like, it's because they're very thin. And as I thought about the design, and I'm one of those people who works a lot on design. Of course, I have my own watch stuff, but this feel, the overall dial, look at the other markers. So you've got these big marks at 3, at 6, and 9. Why not do two medium-sized versions of this at 12? Of course, the double batons or double lines at 12 is fairly common when you have the single lines at 3, 6, and 9. I think that might have been a better way to go with the dial design, actually. Instead of, you've got everything else being just marked by lines, you do have the cardinal numbers up here, but then you throw in a Roman numeral there. It's kind of like, it looks okay. Like, it's not bad, but what would that look like if that was two lines? Look at the width of the X. Imagine if that was just one baton that was the width of that X. Same thing here. You got a thin line between them, but you basically got double batons there with the loom. I think that stands out 10 times better. That's one of the things that I just think would be an improvement. The second thing is the strength of the loom. These are custom pigments. They're working on this. Again, it's not full-on sandwich right now. I think that will improve the quality of the loom. I think that they're still working on getting the exact level of the luminous material correct. Maybe that's the issue, but at least on the prototype, the loom is somewhat weak. And it looks good. I love the orange. I love the color. It does have, I will say, a little bit more of a, maybe it's the best way to say it. It's a bright orange loom, which can come off, and I've seen this on other hands before, to the eye in certain light, it almost looks like a peach color, right? Now, in certain light, it looks like a mid-range to even sometimes a darker orange. This is completely dependent on light and angle of light. So it does have a little bit of a lighter color than I was initially expecting. It is not as orange as the edge of the strap on this particular model. Now the other models have blue loom, green loom, so they're different stories, right? You'll see other pictures of those. Those are going to look different. One of the things that I hope and expect will be different on the production model is that the loom charge lasts a little bit longer. I think part of this is that the production of this prototype where they ended up with stamped loom, but even if it's stamped loom, the sandwich loom is going to have a little bit of a thicker loom. The backing material that's used for loom makes a difference. So coming from the watchmaking perspective, you want white underneath of loom. You don't want dark colors underneath the loom, for example, because that actually plays into how much of a luminosity you get from the material is actually the surface on which the loom is printed. Now, it's on the sort of the watchmaking design side that most people maybe aren't aware of, but that's just a reality. And I mean, I've dealt with it. So like whenever I've made custom dials before myself and I'm putting loom dots on a dial, let's say I've got a dark gray dial, I did this on my dual time watch, I put white paint underneath of the locations where I'm putting the loom because that helps the luminosity. On the prototype, it's a little bit dull. It doesn't pick up a lot of light, doesn't last long. But again, I think that that's going to be fixed. So as I recap and sort of think about the pros and cons of this, some of these cons are not issues that are going to be issues in the production models. The bezel with the crown at 2 is going to be fine. The dial is going to be an actual sandwich dial. The loom's going to be good. All that's going to be fine. I mean, my channel is a little bit different than some others, but it's I think important to show that iteration of what a company is trying to go through to get you the best watch they can on your wrist. And that's just part of the process. I think it's important to talk about that process and see the work and love and attention that goes into the creation of a watch and the time it takes, and that there's going to be manufacturing issues. There's going to be those things. It's just a reality of the micro brand world of watch manufacturing in general, or even something where a small brand like me, where I have to go through my own issues with creating dials or parts of or holders and things for cases. So it's just part of the process, and I like bringing those things out. So in actual cons, I think the potential ones might be somewhat unused type of if you want to call it, it's not really a complication, but a feature of a watch. Navigation, probably just not used that much. Therefore, you really don't need the internal rotating bezel. Therefore, don't need the double crown. In terms of the only real cons of this watch, I think the hands might have been a missed opportunity, and I think that the Roman numerals used at 12 are a missed opportunity, using a double lines, double baton look instead. Like we've got the single markers at 3, 6, and 9. Go with 2 of those here at 12. I think it's just been a better use of space and design.
How about that? It's happened. I actually am liking and enjoying wearing a watch that has 2 crowns on it. Of course, one rotates the inner bezel, and then we have the crown for the time setting and winding. But it's actually a good case design. For some reason, I didn't like it as much with the Cove. I think that goes down to the dial design and sort of that overall look and feel. But on this strap and with this dial design, it feels more natural. It feels like a good design and fit for its intended purpose. And I've actually really enjoyed having this around, and I'll probably pick up one of these models. I've given you the pros and cons, and we'll see what happens going forward with this particular series. But they are available on Feynman's website on pre-order starting today. So get your order in, and hopefully you'll enjoy it as much as I have the past week wearing this thing around. I'm Brian. Thanks for joining me. Subscribe, hit that bell if you want updates. Follow me on Instagram at watch_complications, and check out my site, watchcomplications.com. I am out.